The following podcast is brought to you by the Johners Podcasting Network, found exclusively at wrestlingwithjohners.com. Hello and welcome to the very latest episode of Legends Masterclass Series, hosted by me. My name is Johners, the host of the Wrestling with Johners podcast, and this is episode 5 of the Legends Masterclass Series. And previous guests, as I hope you're aware, were Marty Jones, of course. I spoke to him well over a year ago. Tony St. Clair was another wonderful guest on the Legends Masterclass Series. Adrian Street with Miss Linda, of course, a wonderful couple, wonderful interview there with the two of them. And more recently, earlier on this year, Johnny Kidd. And for episode 5 of my Legends Masterclass, I couldn't think of a better guest to have on, to be honest with you. Legendary ring announcer, referee, and all-round good guy, Lee Bamber. Lee, great to have you on the Legends Masterclass. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, John, and thank you for asking. I'm not sure if I deserve the mantle of being in the Legends Masterclass, but thank you for inviting me anyway.
No, you're very welcome. And I certainly believe that you are well and truly deserving of being on one of these episodes being described as a legend. And of course, you are part of the British Wrestlers Hall of Fame, which we will talk about a little bit later on, of course. But there's so many topics we're going to hit on. Of course, your wrestling fandom, going way back in time there to when wrestling first came into your life. Your turn as a red coat as well, Lee. How that all kind of transpired into you becoming a referee and getting involved in the wrestling business. Of course, we're going to talk about Brian Dixon and your journey through the wrestling business and over what I believe is 38 years this year, Lee.
That's right. Yes, 38 years. So let's hope I make it to the 40th. But yeah, it's 38 years this year, which is at the beginning, you never think you're going to survive that long because the business has changed so much over the years. But here we are, 38 years later.
Absolutely. And I'm going to ask you kind of just off of your last statement there. I mean, 38 years in the wrestling business, you've been a wrestling fan for a very large portion of your life. And we will get into that, of course. But are you still as passionate about British wrestling or pro wrestling as you were when you started in the business all them years ago?
I am. I still get very excited by it because it's changed so much. And the danger is you've got to evolve with it. As you mentioned, I grew up in the days of World of Sport and the Lord Mount Evans rules and Saturday afternoon 4 o'clock with Kent Walton, and that's what I saw as a kid, and that's what I fell in love with. And then my dad took me to the wrestling. Our nearest venue was the Brent Town Hall in Wembley, so a Monday night there. Not every Monday because I think it ran certainly every month. It might have even been every 2 weeks. But it was special treats and Christmas and birthdays and things like that. We went to the wrestling. And that's changed so much now. We've got a completely different style of wrestling, but it's still very exciting because I think when I started, it was the World of Sport, and that's still who I am, really. That's still the style that I like. If I'm flicking through YouTube clips or whatever, I will still get those old World of Sport clips. But then when you work with the guys I'm working with now, some of the moves they do are phenomenal. So it's a different world. But I think the reason why I'm survived so long is that I do still enjoy it because there is the respect, if you like, for the newer guys respect me because I've been around forever. And I watch some of the stuff they do and think, wow. So it's a different beast, but it's still very exciting.
Absolutely. And I think, more modern wrestling, whether it be British or American, dare I say, I think the fundamentals are still there that kind of carried the British scene 30, 40 years ago in terms of the larger than life characters, the enthusiastic crowds. And I think the traditional British style, I think it's had a bit of a resurgence over the last decade or so. And there are so many pros, certainly on the British scene, that are still believe and use and demonstrate the British style of wrestling. I mean, recently, of course, He's another legend, Johnny Kidd, who helped to pioneer the British style and bring it into the more modern era. And of course, individuals like Dean Allmark and younger individuals as well that really truly believe that the British technical style is still the best style after all these years.
Yeah, James Mason's another one that's still doing the rounds, and even Guy, I mean, you were speaking to Connor Mills on your podcast the other day. He's another one that can do the very modern style if he's working for that sort of promotion. But if you put him in the ring and say, do a classic match, he can. And Jordan Breaks is another guy that really is very, very good to watch if you want to see a modern wrestler doing what we could call the old style, the golden age of wrestling style.
Absolutely. Because where it was the norm 40 plus years ago, nowadays it's more of a novelty, the traditional British style. And I think that's what makes certain individuals stand out in the modern era. And like I say, they're doing it very, very well. But I think the last time I saw you, Lee, was earlier on this year in Cheltenham. Not sure if you remember, at the legendary Cheltenham Town Hall for WPW Super Clash. And you were, of course, the master of ceremonies there, looking over proceedings for the evening, Lee. But you're still just as active nowadays, going through your social media. I see that you're busy with various groups in the southeast and occasionally Cheltenham, of course, and still enjoying it more than ever.
Yeah, I'm very lucky because I started with All Star Promotions back in 1985, and they were coming up at the time, because before then it was Dow Martins and Joint Promotions and Max Crabtree, so your TV one, and Brian Dixon was just building, and so I was lucky enough to get in at the right time to work with Brian, and that was 85 when I first started working for him, and then since then I've basically been an all-star guy ever since. But occasionally I do get asked for other promotions. WrestleForce, Ollie Peace very kindly gives me a call every now and again and asks me to come along and MC or referee for him. Occasionally with LDN, Rumble Promotions, we talk about the old style, Steve Barker's Rumble Promotions. They're another classic, because Steve goes back as far as I do. So his values are the traditional world of sport values as well. But yeah, the phone still rings. There are a lot of promoters around now as well. So there's probably a lot of them that haven't got a clue who I am, or wouldn't want me to do it anyway because they want a younger image or whatever. But I still do enough. I used to do quite a bit for Premier Promotions, John Fremantle. So yeah, it's nice to be asked.
Absolutely. And one of the promotion which I'm going to talk about a little bit later on is WAW in Norwich and the Knights, and we'll talk a little bit about them a little bit later on. But going back to the Cheltenham Town Hall and WPW Super Clash, and that venue is steeped in history, as we know, and has hosted many wrestling events over many years, including hosting the World of Sport and All Star Wrestling and various other groups over the years. Is it a venue that you worked at before we met earlier on this year? I'm sure you have probably worked in the Cheltenham Town Hall before, Lee.
Yes, yeah. Monday nights in the good old days, so the 80s and 90s. Monday night was wrestling night. Yeah, again for All Star. So working with all the greats there, and Dave Taylor's and Skull Murphys and Mark Rocco's and all that. And it's a lovely venue. It's an ornate venue. The atmosphere there is great if you get that full as well, because it bounces off the walls, and it is really. And I noticed this time they actually had taken it down, because I said to Matt, the promoter, have they still got that mirror? Because when you got in the ring, down one end there used to be an oval mirror, big oval mirror, and you could always tell the wrestlers who wanted to make absolutely certain they looked gorgeous, because they would all fit. And we always used to say, is that Dave Taylor mirror still there? Because Dave used to get them, muscular guy, and you can see he was just checking himself, saying, yeah, I'm ready to go. But that was a lovely big mirror down. I don't know where it is now, but it's not there anymore.
Oh, I love the fact you called it the Dave Taylor mirror. I'll have to share this with him, see if he finds that amusing. But we talk about some of the other venues that you've worked at, some of the more prestigious venues over the years. Tell us about some of those. And would I be right in thinking that you have worked at the Royal Albert Hall before as well?
I have it in a way. I mean, that's another one of those birthday specials when I was a kid venue we used to go to. because that was on a Wednesday night, and that was a monthly show, again with Max and joint promotions. But Brian Dixon did one there in April of 1987. That was a very big building. And about that time, that's when All Star were really becoming a force to be reckoned with, because they'd just got the TV contract for ITV. And it was going to be Mitzi Muller's final match, or at least one of them, but the last big one anyway. And I think Brian wanted to do something special, so he put on a girls' tag match, the first ever girls' tag match at the Royal Albert Hall, and that was in '87. So I was involved in that. I wasn't an MC nor referee. It's such a big venue and such a complex venue that Brian said, "Can you just make sure everyone's in the right place?" That was my job, make sure everyone was ready to go, everyone's in the right place, because it's a complete rabbit warren of a place with the dressing rooms and everything. So that was a great show to work on. There's quite a few stories about that. I mean, we went down for the press day about a month or so beforehand, and we were all there. We did all the press. Well, the boys did all the press interviews and things of Nagasaki and John Quinn and the girls, and Fuji Yamada, as he was known then. And afterwards, and again, Brian was one of the beauties of Brian Dixon, that he was a man of inspiration. He'd have an idea, and we did the press run. We finished a bit early than we thought we were going to, and he suddenly thought, I know, as we're in London, why don't we take the stars and make a nuisance of them down at the newspapers? They weren't expecting it, so Nagasaki went off in his big car with a couple of people, and I was in a car with John Quinn. And now I don't know whether John had only been over for a little while, or whether he was between cars or whatever, but he had this very old Ford, was it a Capri or Fiesta? It was a knackered old Ford, something or the other. So we're going through the streets of Kensington out of the Albert Hall to get to the newspapers, and it started to rain, and he turned on the windscreen wipers, and that fell off and pinged across the floor in the middle of the road. So he gets out all annoyed. And at that time, Quinn was a big star. He'd taken on, Big Daddy at Wembley, and he was probably the greatest villain we'd ever seen. And he's driving this knackered old car right in the middle of Kensington, stopping the traffic while he goes to retrieve this windscreen wiper. But
yes. Absolutely fabulous, absolutely fabulous. And other kind of famed and prestigious venues that you've hosted at or worked at, and there must be a few that jump out to you that you have very fond memories from, Lee.
Yes, there's quite a few. I mean, of modern times, I think one of the greatest venues I did was, and thanks to the Knight family for this, because that was WAW's Fightmare, which was at Carrow Road, the football ground of Norwich City. So that was a heck of an atmosphere. That's just about 5 years ago, that one. And just as an MC, just to hear your voice bounce off an entire football ground, it was great for the Knight family, because that was one of their big ambitions, to do Carrow Road, and to hear the crowd shout. And it was televised as well. They did a video of it, and that was brilliant. When working with Mick Foley on that one too, so that was a lovely day. Back in time a little bit further, there were great venues like Colston Hall in Bristol. That was always fun, and nice ones to do. We had Oxford Playhouse, some of the old southern venues. The White Rock in Hastings was a particularly nice one. And we still do some of those nice, because modern theatre, when we still run at Dunstable at the Grove, which is a big, lovely theatre. So they're and some of the old traditional ones, like when you talk about the Dartford area down that way, and in Gravesend, Woodville Hall. I mean, that was going back in the days of the old World of Sport again, and that's still going now.
Yeah, and I remember I used to watch, I'm pretty sure it was All Star. It must have been All Star in the early 90s, 92, 93, 94, from the Oxford Town Hall in Oxford, of course. But another beautiful venue where I saw the big, larger-than-life stars, Pat Roach and Giant Haystacks. And I'm pretty sure that I saw a Dynamite Kid on an All Star show in about 94. Yes, unfortunately, a shadow of the figure that you would have seen on TV a few years earlier, but still, I feel very, very honoured to have seen him when I did in 94. But let's kind of forget about my wrestling fandom. Let's talk a bit about your wrestling fandom then, Lee. And you said that you've been in the business 38 years and started in 1985. We'll talk all about that. But going back in time even further, Lee, when did professional wrestling first come into your life, and what sort of impact did it have on you?
I think for everybody it starts the same way, and people in the business too, whether you want to be a referee, MC, or a wrestler. And you look up at these larger than life characters, especially now, you look at all the big American stars and you think, oh, I'd like to do that. But it all starts the same way for everyone, and that is being a fan. In my case, it was 4 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, watching it on the telly. And I liked it because it was the combination of sport, but it was showbiz as well. It was entertaining, but in those days, especially, there were serious rules. The referee was in charge, so it had the seriousness to it, but of a sport that you'd see on the BBC, because that was the big difference. Because you had Grandstand on the BBC doing the proper sports, like your cricket and your tennis and your rugby and all that. Meanwhile, over on ITV, we were doing ice speedway and oval racing, stock car racing.
Darts, I remember darts being a world of sport, yes.
Darts as well, yeah. And so I used to watch this in the mid-70s and half watch it and half enjoy it. But I think the match that made me think, all right, I really do want to be a part of this, was when Kendo Nagasaki was unmasked by Big Daddy, which I think was about 76.
About then, that's right, yeah.
And that was quite a sensation. I mean, Nagasaki unmasked voluntarily at Wolverhampton a few years later, but that was the first time, and the crowd went mad for that. And I thought that was the first time it really grabbed me, and so I followed it as a fan. And how old was I then? I was about sort of 13, 14 at that time. And what happened that made me take that next step? Young guys today that want to be wrestlers find a wrestling school, maybe have a little grapple with their mates in the playground or whatever. I never really wanted to be a wrestler. I was never very good at it. When I was at school, it was the only report of my school report that I actually forged and changed.
Oh,
yes.
Tell us about
judo. Well, we did judo, and I enjoyed it because it was as near to wrestling as you could get in a normal, in a school, because we didn't have wrestling, but we had judo. And I was all right at it, but the guy that took it, our teacher, Mr. Crode, he was a big old burly expert at all this, and if back in those days, if he didn't quite measure up, he was a kind guy, but I was never going to be his star judo pupil. So he put on the report, Lee always tries his best and a fair term work and effort and that sort of thing. And he gave me an E. Now, capital E is quite easy to turn into a B when you just do that.
I like your thinking here, Lee.
And I don't do that sort of thing. I'm a good guy. But it was the only thing I was going to be embarrassed to take back to my mum and dad, because I really wanted to get at least an average in it. So I changed that E into a B for judo. So, I was very naughty there. But what was I saying? Oh, yeah, I think, with the guys that do that kind of training, but how do you train to become a referee or an MC back in those days? Apart from watching it, you'd watch it. So you pick up tips and things that would impress you. But we had just changed TVs. We had, so long ago, we had a black and white TV and we bought a color TV. So now we had two TVs that were working very well. So my dad put the black and white one in the spare room. Everyone started watching the color. So now we've got a TV in a room that we don't very often go to that works. So again, every Saturday at 4 o'clock, I used to go in there and I was a referee. I used to watch the wrestling, but I'd be like, break it up, stand back, let him up now, and all this kind of stuff. And enjoying myself in a bizarre sort of 13-year-old be doing this kind of way. But it was kind of training without going to a training school. So when I did eventually meet Brian Dixon and start, I kind of knew what to do. I was still very green, of course, but I kind of knew what to do, and I kind of watched it on the telly. So that's sort of how I started. But yeah, my training school was in the front room in front of a telly, copying the referees of the 70s.
How
Yeah.
fascinating! And did you get? I think you alluded to it earlier, but did you actually get to the shows? Did your dad take you to wrestling, or did you go with your friends as a teenager?
Yeah, Dad was the person that used to take me to say Brent Town Hall in Wembley on a Monday night was the nearest one to us, and then as a special Christmas treat or whatever, we used to do the Albert Hall, because the Albert Hall were the big shows. And again, I used to obviously enjoy the matches because they were the best. That was like the venue to see them in. But then I could also get to see all my favorite referees and MCs, because we all had our favorite wrestlers, but I wanted to be a referee before I was an MC, really. So I used to watch them and learn from them. So I was more excited about who's going to be the referee or the master of ceremonies than the matches potentially.
Do you remember some of those legendary referees and MCs that maybe inspired you and you emulated for all those years? Do you remember any of the names of the ones that you followed or particularly enjoyed watching?
I mean, in those days for MCs, there was Fred Downs, who was a short guy, a small guy, which worked quite well if you wanted to be intimidated by somebody the size of Pat Roach.
Yes.
And Mike Judd, who also worked in the Dow Martin office. A lot of the YouTube clips will show the colourful Brian Crabtree. He was the one that would put the half red and half blue, and Big Daddy's brother, and Max Crabtree's brother. So he did a lot of them. But for me, I think my favourite was a guy called John Harris. We called him the Captain. He was very suave, sophisticated, had a beautiful velvet voice. Again, you'll find some YouTube clips of John Harris. As I say, we called him the Captain. And he lived in Lee, near Lewisham, Catford area. And when I started, Brian Dixon said to me, we're going to put you with John Harris and you can watch and see what he does and pick up from there. So for me, that was like a dream come true. And I got to work with him and travel with him. But he passed on little tips. In those days, nowadays you have a radio mic, but you had a mic with a lead then, and he'd always say, always get enough of the lead in the ring and stand on the lead when you do your announcements, because sometimes if you got something that the crowd were annoyed by, somebody would rush to ringside and try and pull the microphone off you. If you got your foot on the lead, it wouldn't go. But John was very good at the subtleties of wrestling. He'd get in the ring and in that velvet voice that commanded attention would say, "Good evening, everybody. Welcome along. Blah, blah. We do have one apology tonight, and it concerns Mark Rocco." And the crowd would go, "Oh, no, he is here, but you know what he's like, so we thought we'd apologize for him." So he was the one. And I remember there was one occasion at the Albert Hall, and again, to say, John was masterful in timing. So a match had finished, he'd announced the winner. He'd just started to do next time's bill, and he noticed out the corner of his eye, because if you know the Albert circular thing, and he could see one of the wrestlers quite high up hand the commissionaire, one of the stewards, a bit of paper and point to the ring. So Don thought, "Oh, hello, have they changed the order? Has something gone wrong? And he pointed to the ring. So he goes, "All right, this message is coming down to me, isn't it?" So he's making it the next time's bill last the perfect time that it would take this guy to walk all the way down the steps and past the thing. And he said, "Now, final match. Next month, we'll see the amazing Cat Weasel take on Jimmy Brace. And here's all the bit of paper has just arrived. Must be very important. So thank you, sir." And he opened a bit of paper, and it said bollocks. That's all it said. So now he's got the whole of the Albert Hall in front of him. He's promoted this bit of paper, so it wasn't subtle. He said, because one of the wrestlers, being wrestlers, had just written bollocks on the and handed it to John. So now what do? You got the whole of the Albert Hall. So quick as a flash, I mean, very quick, John sort of said, if you've got a Ford Capri registration XYZ, you've left your lights on. So would you please go back to it? But yeah, that would have thrown someone if you got the whole of the Albert Hall and you just get that as a message. So, yeah.
Brilliant. And you spoke about his subtleties and certain tropes. What kind of subtleties or tropes have you become famous for as a ring announcer over the years then, Lee?
Oh,
To put you on the spot.
The answer, I suppose, the answer is you have to ask someone else that, really, wouldn't you? What do I don't know.
Or certain things that Lee Bamber is famous for. Certain things you like to slip in there every so often.
Nicking most of John Harris's material, probably. I have I have done that a couple of times. I think it's just what I like to do. What I hope people think I do is that I build up the wrestlers just enough. I don't over dramatize it. I try and give them a good as possible announcement, but without being too over dramatic. And if you've got a small venue, you can't really go full on Madison Square Garden, Money in the Bank with it, because that really does. You notice when you're in a small venue and someone is trying to be a WWE announcer by bawling into the microphone, and I think that's probably it with me. You have to be careful, because as I said earlier on, it's evolved and you have to evolve with it. But at the same time, I'm still doing it the way I do it. So if somebody likes me, then that's good, because I still do it practically the old-fashioned way, with a bit more perhaps, but I still don't do that kind of introducing first and all this kind of stuff. And I usually still wait until the wrestlers are in the ring before I announce them. Not always, but usually, and do it that way. So I haven't been Americanized. So.
And that's good to hear. And we wouldn't want you to change. We would not want you to change. But now, going back kind of before you were a ring announcer and a referee and even a red coat, something that really struck me, Lee, was that you worked in department stores. Now, my father worked in department stores. I had a very lengthy career in retail before anything else, before more modern times, in a previous life. But you worked in Selfridges, Harrods, Hamleys, so probably three of the most famous department stores, certainly in the UK, maybe further afield, but Harrods and Hamleys in particular. That sounds like quite a fun few places to work there, and that you must have had a good, a good couple of years or few years in those department stores, Lee.
Yeah, it was. I didn't work for those stores. I was working in them because I worked for one company that did all that. I was an in-store demonstrator for a bit. So for a few months they sent me to Hamleys, and for about a year I was at Harrods and all that kind of stuff. It was a thing called the Magic Rainbow Drawing Board, which was I think I even still do it if you go into Hamleys. It was a board about that sort of size, and you had a little stick, and you would wipe over the top of this black goo, and as you moved it, there was colour underneath, and I
remember it very well. Yeah.
And the guy that ran that, the company that owned that, was a guy called Marvin Burglas, who is David Burglas, the famous magician's son, and he went on to do very well for himself as the creator of Marvin's Magic, which is available in all department stores now. So so we used to do that at the front. You had to have a bit of a knack to it, and one of the little tips, you used to have to spray the top of it with furniture polish. That made it more subtle. When it was new, you couldn't really get it to work very well, which was not a good thing to try and sell. So we used to give it a go with the furniture polish, and with a bit of practice, you could get some nice flowers or dogs or fish or whatever out of it.
Absolutely. I wish I knew about the tip about the furniture polish. I would have used that all them years ago. But from there, I mean, you wanted a bit more of a public role, and that led to you becoming a red coat at Butlins. Once again, another dream job for any youngster wanting to be kind of an entertainer or get their foot in the door with entertaining public. And you see kind of many famous famous TV stars over the years start their career as a red coat or a blue coat, depending on which holiday camp you worked for. But tell us about how you got the opportunity as a red coat. I'm guessing it was something that you were kind of hoping to attain, and a job that you really wanted to kind of get your foot on the entertainment ladder, so to speak. But how did you become a red coat in the first place?
Yeah, it's a weird one, this, because I started before, back in 1982. Yes, I'm that old. For a few weeks, I was a blue coat at Chesil Beach in Dorset, down at Weymouth, and that's where I very first ever got into a wrestling ring. It was Jimmy Hagan that used to promote the shows there. So I did that for a couple of weeks, and then they were going to transfer me to a different centre, but that was going to be like miles away. And when you get on the coach and you're heading home after a few weeks, and then you're not certain about it, and it passes through London where you live, I thought, I got off the coach and I didn't complete the course on that one. So a couple of years later, I wanted to give it another go. And by then I was doing a little bit of comparing and stuff. And so they were looking for like a junior compare at Butlin. So I started off doing that. That's where my very first ever wrestling suit, my white one, came from. So I did that for a few weeks, and then they changed some of the people around. So then they were going, oh, now we've got too many, and you're the newest, so you might have to go. But I tell you what, how would you like a job as a red coat? So I got it by default, really. They technically it was demoting, but it wasn't really, because it was great to be a red coat and wear the badge and do all that. And then I got to do the wrestling that way, and that's how I met Brian Dixon. But we used to call the bingo, do the donkey derby, host the shows, make sure everyone was all right. There were long days, because you used to get up very early, and you'd be up until late at night. You get up just to, even if your first job wasn't until calling bingo or something at 11 o'clock in the morning, you still had to be there for breakfast to welcome the guests in. So sometimes you just get up, say morning, 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 as they all walked in, and go back to bed for a couple of hours.
Absolutely.
It was a long day, but yeah, and the pay wasn't very good, but it gives you lots of experiences.
It's all about the experience, isn't it, Lee? It's all about the
Yeah.
experience and where it takes you. And I mean, I, as a child, spent many a summer holiday at various Butlins camps, I think Bogdan Regis and Minehead, but had a lot of fun as a child. And Butlins was a big part of my childhood, and certainly during the summer holidays. But you mentioned that you kind of first got into a wrestling ring a few years earlier when you was a blue coat, and now you're a red coat in Butlins a few years later. And this is, I'm guessing that it's All Star and Brian Dixon that are hosting the wrestling at the Butlins that you are at. And that's how you become more involved in, Lee?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I joined again at the right time. That was where all the luck suddenly fell in, because, you can badger a promoter saying, oh, please book me and all that. But a lot of it is luck. It's like anything in any form of show business or life. So, yes, I was a record at Butlins, and then Brian was doing the wrestling with All Star. And again, this was 1985 and 86, the two seasons that I had. And it was handy for me because I'd watched it on the telly, and because I'd followed it, because I'd wanted to do it. When I emceed for Brian, I was, in my head, I was back to being John Harris again. I was back to doing the world of sport. So I was doing it as well as I could and as professional as I could. And whereas some of the redcoats may not have known or followed wrestling, so they were just treating it like another mic job, if you like. But Brian was quite impressed that I would do it properly, if you like, or do it with respect. And it happened to be at the right time, because about then, that's when Brian sometimes, because he would referee, Brian Dixon would always be there, and he'd usually referee. So I got to know him through that. And then for some weeks he wasn't there, and we thought, oh no, where's Brian gone? And that was the time when he was off negotiating the ITV contract, because up until then it was just Max Crabtree and Joint Promotions. Now they were the Saturday afternoon televised, but Brian was getting his foot in the door there as well. So I sort of met Brian and then did all the Butlin shows, and I'd have one day off as a redcoat a week. And usually it was on a Tuesday, but on Wednesday night, is when Brian was just down the road at Bognor at the Regis Centre, as it was known then. So I managed to negotiate a bit with them, say, can I move my day off? Because Brian basically said, well, we could give you a couple of proper shows, town shows to do if you were free. So I managed to do that, so I could do the Butlins one for him as a Redco, and then literally nip down the road to do some of the seaside shows, and that was the very first one I did.
And I'm guessing there was a conversation between yourself and Brian around this time that led you to leaving Butlins as a Redcoat and kind of working more regularly for All Star and for Brian, maybe going on the road with them. And I'm guessing it was around this time that you would have kind of made that transition, made that change, and started working more in wrestling and kind of leaving your Redcoat job.
Yeah, it was the end of the season anyway, and some Redcoats do 1 season, 2 seasons, 3 if they're lucky. I'd done 2, so it was the end of the season, so we were all going, and it was more of a case of will you be invited back? Because unlike now, which is almost all year round, if we had a season which would run until end of September, beginning of October, then it would basically stop. They'd keep a couple on, but that was it. And then if you're lucky, you get invited back for Christmas, and then it'll stop again until till Easter. So it was the end of the season anyway. And then Brian said, well, I might have some more of these town shows. I didn't drive then, that was the problem.
Right.
So I'd either have to have lifts or go by train. And sometimes that was okay, but quite often trying to get a train, they're not always near the venues. And some of them, by the time you finish the show, the last train had gone. So Brian would say, oh, well, if you could drive, we could give you even more shows. So that's when I learned to drive. After that, I did an intensive course. I did it all managed to do it all in 1 week, which is a heck of a thing to go from not being a driver to passing. And my dad didn't drive either, so I couldn't get any help from the family. But I think it was just Brian saying, we can give you some more shows if you could drive. So I went away and learned to drive, and then I bought myself a fairly knackered old car, but I still managed to get to the venue, so that was all right.
Brilliant. And I understand it was Brian. We're going to give him a lot of credit during this interview, and we'll talk tons more about him towards the end. But it was Brian that also gave you your ring name, Lee Bamber. So tell us about that, because it's an utterly fascinating story about how you became Lee Bamber thanks to Brian Dixon.
Yeah, I mean, some people in wrestling might know, but a lot won't, that Lee Bamber really isn't my name. Lee is. And it was Brian that gave me. I wasn't being all showbiz and thinking, I know, I'll have a ring name, please. It was just when we were again at Bognor. Brian just used to see me, and he thought I looked like Bamber Gascoigne, who used to do University Challenge. Pictures are available on YouTube.
It's the hair. I'm sure it's the hair and the glasses.
Brian had names for everybody, Johnny Kidd was Mr. Smooth, and he wouldn't say hello Johnny, he would go hello Mr. Smooth or hello Smooth, how are you? And so for me it was just a case of saying hello Bamber. So hello Bamber just stuck, so you couldn't sort of say to him, no, it's Lee. No, it was hello Bamber, that was it. So and that was all right. And the very first show I did as a referee, again John Harris, we mentioned earlier, was the MC, and we get in the ring. So we've actually started the show, and John said, would you please welcome your referee, Lee Travis? I don't know where that came from. So for one match only, the first time I ever refereed, I was Lee Travis, but then Lee Bamber was used a bit. But it wasn't until we did a TV show, the first of the TV ones that I was lucky enough to do. And of course, by then, the name had to be given to the TV people and to Kent Walton and all that. So from then on in, it really was Lee Bamber, and it hasn't changed. But it's all Brian Dixon's fault. It wasn't my idea. It was just something that happened. Which is quite sweet, because now that Brian's no longer with us, it's my own little personal legacy, if you like. The Brian's the man that gave me the name, and I shall carry that through wrestling till I stop.
Yeah.